is a GDE expert for Android, Google Play, and Flutter, if I'm not wrong. You're based in Brighton, UK.
Yeah,
and
that's it.
How is the weather right now there?
I think winter's on its way. It's a bit cloudy today, and you can definitely feel a bit of a cold breeze. So yeah, staying inside and wrapping up.
Yeah, I got it. And yeah, as you can see, we are kind of all mobile. Not all mobile, but I'm kind of surrounded by Androids around me. And yeah, that's it. I think that the stage is yours. And to all of you, have a nice session. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Cool. So yeah, today, thanks for coming, by the way. Thanks for coming to my session. As mentioned, my name's Joe, and I'm a GD on the Android platform. And today we'll be diving into Jetpack Compose. So originally I was going to do some slides and have like a presentation, but there's a lot of great talks already doing that with Jetpack Compose. So I thought I'll do a bit of a live coding session, and we can explore Jetpack Compose together and see how we can get started using it ourselves. So just a quick disclaimer, this talk is aimed at those who may not have had a chance yet to explore Compose. We're going to be going from the very start and familiarizing ourselves with the foundations of Compose. So we won't be going too much into the internals either. This is meant to be a practical walkthrough, and I want you to be able to go away and kind of get started with Compose yourselves and give you enough knowledge to do so. So yeah, just if you've already done stuff with Compose and you've already started to use it, there might not be too much value to take away from this talk. But otherwise, I'd love to get started and sort of start taking a look at Compose itself. So before we do get started, just some disclaimers around Compose itself. Compose is still in alpha. I think a lot of people know that, but it is changing very rapidly, and there probably will be for some time. So even into like early next year and maybe mid next year, I don't know when it's going to be stable, but it's when you're playing with Compose and you're using it and trying to integrate libraries and annotation processes, you're likely to run into issues of compatibility. That's probably going to be completely normal for a bit, but saying that, it is quite stable. It feels it in the moment, but there will be some things you run into. It's not production ready, as tempting as it may be. Please don't use it in production apps. You can try; it might be okay, but it's not production ready yet. And if you are looking to use Jetpack Compose, you'll need to make sure you're using the latest Canary release of Android Studio, which is currently Android Studio 4.2, Canary 13. So with that said, whilst some of the APIs are changing, the concepts and methodologies around Compose will all stay the same. Like what I mean by that is that maybe you're using a certain composable, they might change some of the arguments or the APIs around that, but the way you build apps using Compose is likely going to stay the same from now until stable. So there's not really a better time to get started and start familiarizing yourself with it if you like to. So let's get cracking, I think. As I said, this could be a bit of a live coded session, and we're just going to dive straight in. So if you've got the latest version of the Canary release of Android Studio, there's actually an option in the wizard to create a new Compose activity. And I think if you haven't started with Compose yet, I think that is the best way to get started, because you can create a new app and it will kind of set everything up for you. So once the project is synced, the required Compose dependencies, the required, there's even some sample code that will set that up. So what we do here, for example's sake, is we'll hop on over to the build.gradle file, just see how things differ slightly compared to how we currently building Android apps in our build.gradle file. So the main differences are just some build features to enable Compose, and also a couple of Kotlin compiler options that need to be set. These are, as you can see, set by default when using the project wizard. But if you're looking to add Compose to an existing project, for now, you'll need to add those. This may change in future. I don't know too much about that. But yeah, that will be there by default. But if you're looking to add Compose to an existing app, you'll need to copy that in. So with the Compose dependencies, we can see here that in the wizard, we've actually had a couple of Compose dependencies added for us. And the nice thing with Compose is that each kind of requirement or responsibility or area is split into its own dependency. So Compose is a pretty big project. Like if you think of the Android the UI framework and everything that is around that, at a high level, you can kind of think, oh, there's a few components, but there's a lot of things going on underneath the hood, and there's a lot of different components anyway. So what Compose has done is split that out into a collection of different dependencies, which you can add as you require them. So I think these three are kind of, as you can see, they're added in this sample app. So these are kind of, for now, getting started. These three will be enough for you. You've got the UI, which is kind of the foundational components, and then material is kind of like the material component library that we currently probably use on Android in our material apps. And there's also other things. There's like an animation dependency. There's a test dependency, and a foundational dependency, which had some other foundational features. But you can explore those as you see fit and as you come across them in tutorials and so on. But for now, these. So with that said, if we hop on over to the main activity, and as mentioned, we've already got kind of a nice little, really simple sample app set up for us. So one important thing to note, this already, how we currently build Android apps, this already looks very different. As you can see, if we open up our directories a bit, there's no layout directory. We don't have this XML file that we're used to building our layout with. That's because Compose doesn't use XML layouts at all. All our UI is created programmatically. So with Compose, we can see here, we've got that every piece of our UI is a function. So these are known as composables. Each composable that you create represents a small part of your UI. So ideally, the aim is that your UI will be a collection of small composables, and there'll be modular pieces that come together to build a bigger part of a user interface. But as you're learning and as you're getting used to Compose, it doesn't matter if you're just creating massive method functions and sticking everything together. I think that's a great way to get started and perfectly fine. And then you can refactor it and make things smaller as you see fit. And each, when you're wanting to set properties of composables, you can provide arguments into functions, and they can be used to configure the properties of a composable. But no XML. Our UI is as one programmatically. So let's take a look at what the wizard has already created for us. So we start with this text composable, as I guess this is kind of what we might already be used to in Android. So in current Android, let's call it, in the UI framework, when we want to display some text on screen, we'll use a text view. Maybe we have that in our XML layout, or we create that programmatically. We can see here, this text composable is from the UI dependency of Jetpack Compose, and all this is a composable that allows us to provide some text, and it will render that inside of that composable. What we do here is pass the text, and that will display it for us. So similar to how in Android we might create a text view and then set the text on. Like there is.
Joe, sorry, we think that we have a little bit of problems with the connection.
Okay, with my connection.
Yeah, it seems, yeah. Like 2 sentences before they were like stopped. Try if you can try again to re-explain.
Okay, the text part. Okay.
Thank
cool.
you.
So skipping back a bit, I'll try to start again from the text side of things. Similar to how we have in Android at the moment, where we're creating a text view either from our XML layout or we're creating one programmatically. This is we can create an equivalent in Compose with a text composable, and that's part of the UI Jetpack Compose dependency. So similar to how we may set the text on the Android UI framework currently, we can pass in a text value, and that will set the text for us. So this composable, now that we've provided that could be used to render some text on screen. And this is just one example. of a composable. As we can see from the autocomplete pop-up there is a collection of arguments that we can pass in. So this is kind of like in XML how we may currently set all the different view attributes. We can set like the font size, the weight, the text color. At the end of the day, it's kind of a similar approach, except we're doing this programmatically. We're taking those properties and we're passing them into that composable, which is essentially a function, and that composable function passing the properties, and those are then being set. And whilst this is just one example, a text example, the cool thing about Compose is that pretty much most of the stuff you're currently used to using on Android, there's still some stuff missing, but things are kind of very similarly named. So if you're looking to add a floating action button, a top app bar, a bottom navigation view, you can start typing these in your IDE, and most of the time you'll be able to find what it is you're looking for and just have a play around and see how things work and see how things feel. Obviously, there's great documentation too, but the autocomplete here is really powerful, and the fact that things are named in a similar way is really helpful there. So with that text in mind, we can see that we've got this text defined in a composable function. So whenever you're creating composables or you want to have a composable function, you have to annotate with a composable, and that's what lets the compiler know that is to be compiled as a composable element. So now that we've got our composable, how do we do something with that on screen? So currently in Android, we set the content using a layout resource. When we have an activity or a fragment, we can inflate that layout, and that will be used for the layout of our screen. When it comes to composables, currently we need to make use of this set content function. So if we remove all this for now, we don't need to care about the theme or this surface stuff. We'll come to that later. When we're wanting to apply composables on screen, we use the set content function. So you can use this in your fragment as well. So when you're creating your fragment view, you use set content and you add your composables in the body. So anything you add inside of this set content will be rendered on screen within your activity or fragment. So that means if you're having multiple activities and multiple fragments, you can use this in each of those and navigate between them and have your complete composable UI. There are plans in future to have the navigation component support composable navigation. I don't know when that's ready, but I know Google are looking at it. That's not currently available right now. So if you are going to be exploring Compose in a multi-screen situation, I would advise just having the multiple activities or multiple fragments and dealing with it that way for now, because things there are likely to change and you don't want to do work for the sake of it. So that's cool. We've got our composable function. We're setting the content of the screen. But one thing that I don't really want to have to do is every time I do this, I don't want to have to launch the app on a device or an emulator, because that takes time. One really cool thing about Compose, and I think this is where it really shines, is this preview annotation. So what we can do is, for any composable on screen, we can create a preview composable. So what this preview does is it allows us to load up our composable and preview it in a layout inspector. So now here I have my live preview of my composable. I can remove the theme. We don't need that for now, and I can change that, and I can just refresh the preview and view it in real time. I think this is really powerful because it means you don't have to keep hopping back and forth between the emulator. You don't need to keep running the code, and you can view it in place. And you can have as many previews as you want. So if you're having multiple different composables on screen, you can create those and you can preview them in the preview bar. So I think that's something that if you're exploring Compose, that's a really cool thing to utilize and to make use of. Cool. So with that said, I think now we've kind of got kind of a foundational look into things. We've seen the preview, we've seen what a composable function is and how we can use it, and also how we can apply that on the content of our screen. And like I said, we're not going to go into the internal here because we're going to take a practical approach and see how we can get on. So with that said, we've got time now to dive into maybe building some UI. We've seen how everything works, so let's create some stuff of our own. So I'm just going to delete this greeting stuff because we don't want any of that. And what we're going to do is we're going to build, let's build a list of items. So that's quite a common thing in apps. You open the app and you have a feed of content. Maybe it's a list of news articles, a list of, I don't know, tweets or whatever it is, statuses. So yeah, because that's quite a common thing, let's take a bash at building ourselves. So we're going to build remember, as I mentioned, any composable that we want to build has to be annotated with a composable function. So we're going to start here by building a list item. So this list item is going to represent the item of our list, as the name entails. That list item is going to be represented by, we'll just do a string for now. So we'll take some text as an argument, and we'll pass that in as a string argument. So this list item needs to, be a composable. So for now, we're just going to say, we'll make it a text composable. I'm going to set the text to be the text. And we've already seen that, and we've seen what that's done in the previous example. That's pretty much the same as what was loaded before. I'll make a new preview, and we can see that no different than what we had previously. So that's nice. So often when we're building lists and content, quite a material way of doing so is adding cards. We use card to represent content and actions. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap all of this in a card. So the card is from the material package, and there's a lot of stuff in the material package. There's buttons, floating action buttons, cards, input fields, and so on. Literally almost everything that is currently in the material components library, all but a few things. So you can add the card, and the card takes a single composable as its body. So we're going to take that card. We've moved our text composable into that. So with that said, we can refresh that, and it doesn't look too different. And I think because that is on our preview, we've got the background. So I'm going to remove the background on our preview, and we should be able to see that our card is displayed. Nice. Looks a bit cramped, but it's good for now. So we have our composable, and we have our content of our composable. And I did say about, splitting up things into separate composables, but I feel like this is very focused on one thing. So we don't need to do too much there. So let's do, let's add an icon. Often when you're adding lists of content, maybe it's a contact list, or maybe it's a list of any kind of content, there's often an icon to represent something by the side of it. So let's just go ahead and add an asset. And we've created a new vector, and we're going to go ahead and add an icon. So the icon, again, is another composable from the foundational part of Compose. And what this does is it takes something called an image asset. So in Android, currently, we're used to taking our drawables, and we're retrieving drawables. Things are slightly different here, but we can still use the drawable references. I haven't really looked too much into how this happens under the hood and what the difference is between an image asset and a drawable and how they correlate. But Compose kind of takes these things and makes you need to not worry. Helper function called vector resource. And what you can do is you can call that function. You can pass in your resource, your ID, and your icon will reload for you. Under the hood, that's taking, I can't even see it. It's taking the ID, the asset for you, and this icon composable. And there's the same thing for the image. I think it's called image resource. So if you've got a drawable that's not a vector, working with resources, Compose has done a good job at making that not too difficult for us. And we could do the thing for plenty of other resources, such as strings. If we're loading a string, we can pass a string ID in and receive a string back, and other things such as primitive values like integers and booleans. So here we've got our icon and we've got our text. If we try and rebuild this, we're going to see an error because, as I mentioned previously, the card only takes a single composable. You can't pass in two composable children into the card. But we want to display both of these items. So this is where we're going to dive into the layout APIs. So currently in Android, when we're laying out multiple children, we have things such as frame layout, relative layout, linear layout, constraint layout, and all those different ways of displaying groups of children together. The Compose works in very similar way, and we have kind of a very similar way of working with things. So if we want to recreate the effects of the frame layout, so on Android, a frame layout is kind of like a collection of children positioned by gravities, and they can overlap with each other. So in Compose, we have what's called a box, and we can display groups of children together, and they could be displayed on the card, but they're going to be overlapped. But that's kind of recreating what we see currently in the frame layout. We also have the column, which, so in Android now we have linear layout and then vertical. We have a column, which is by laying out vertically, and then in a section, row, which is used for horizontal layout. So Compose kind of taken that linear layout and have things in it, just separate, and each of those will think because should be doing. Cool. So we now have our.
Sorry, we had another problem still with your connection. Can you try again to the last two parts that you were talking on?
Yeah, sure thing. So as I mentioned, we have when we're working with in Android currently, we have the linear layout, which handles both horizontal and vertical layout. What we have in Jetpack Compose is two separate composables. We have a column, and if I rebuild that just so you can see that again, if anyone missed it, we have the column, which is used for laying out components vertically. And then in a similar fashion, we have the row, which is used to handle the horizontal layout of components. So that's kind of taking what the linear layout does and splitting up the responsibilities and having a focused way of managing both horizontal and vertical layout of children. So for here, I'm going to stick with the row because I want things to be laid out in a horizontal fashion. But as we can see, this looks a bit off. So as I previously mentioned, all composables have the ability to pass in arguments, and the row has a collection of arguments that are supported. So one of these, when it comes to the layout APIs, such as the row, the column, there's the concept of alignment, and alignment is essentially the same as gravity. In the few API versions back, it was actually called gravity, but they renamed it to alignment. So currently to how you're used to in Android to laying out like positioning components using certain gravities like top, bottom, start, end, alignment is pretty much the same. So in the row, we have the ability to align things on the vertical axes. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to center things vertically just so that things fit into place. Cool. So that's looking okay. Not quite production ready, but we've got a card and we've got some content. So when it comes to composables, well, even in Android currently, we're used to setting things like margins, padding, widths, heights. There's in Compose, like we can't quite see a concept of that currently. Like there's not a height option or a height argument in any of these composables. So how does that work? So currently, and I think this is probably going to be the way how it stays. There's a concept of modifiers. So a modifier is essentially what we use to manage like global properties of a view. So things like widths, heights, padding, background, and so on. So modifiers are pretty much the same across a lot of composables. So if I can apply a modifier here, like a padding modifier, I can also apply that same padding modifier on a row. Then most of them are not specific to any composables. They are kind of global, and they work the same in a lot of cases. So for example, I can apply a modifier to the card if I want to say, if I spell it right, modifier, I could say, fill max width. So my card is now going to fill the width of the available space because I've said, take up the space that you can and fulfill that. Cool. So that's pretty big, but on screen, it will fill the width of the phone. So I'm just going to make some more space here. So as I mentioned, the modifier, we can also apply things like this is pretty much what I use in most of the cases is padding. There's no really concept of, I don't think there's a concept of margin in Jetpack Compose. So we're going to use some padding here because things currently look a bit cramped. So I'm going to apply some padding and I'm going to say 16 dp. This is a really cool thing with units in Jetpack Compose. We can apply dp, we can apply sp for when you're using text. But padding takes a dp value, so density pixels, and that's just that's equivalent of how we'd currently set padding in Android via XML. So I can refresh that, and I should be able to see that my card view now has padding applied. Nice, it's looking a bit better. And the only thing that's bothering me now is this is very close together. So rather than, I could add padding here, but we don't really need to have text padding on that text. So one thing I am going to do is there's actually a nice composable called spacer. And the spacer is a composable which essentially is used to add space. It's a blank composable. It doesn't have any color unless you set it. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say modifier. We're going to say, we're going to have this to be the width of, I don't know, 12 dp. So we've used a few modifiers there. We've created some space, and that's looking good. So one thing that I would like to point out with modifiers is that you can actually, whilst here we're only using a single modifier, you can essentially chain on as many as you want. So here I could also say fill max height. I could say background color. I could say background, and I could set the background as well. And you can chain on. Used the wrong import, and now it's going to complain. You can essentially set a collection of different modifiers on a single composable and just chain them onto each other, and you can apply them all together. And I think that's really powerful because it just means you can set a collection of things, and it means you can even, if you want a group of modifiers, you can have it as a value, and you can apply that same modifier across different composables if you want, essentially like a variable that you can provide in. So yeah, modifiers are powerful. There's a lot of modifiers. And again, once you start digging in and playing with things and using the autocomplete and the documentation, you'll start to learn more about what is available and what we can use when building apps. Cool. So with that said, we've got our list item. And now what I want to do is I want to actually display those items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new composable function, and we're going to call it list item. We're going to call it list, and that list is going to take in a collection of strings. And we're going to want to display those items on screen. So I'm going to make a new collection of items, just for example's sake. We're just going to say 1, 2, 3, with all different casing and spelling. That's going to annoy me if it's different, so I'm going to fix that. So we've basically got a list of items that we want to display, and we want to display those on screen using our list item composable. So again, this is going to be related to the layout APIs. What we could do here is we could use the column, we could loop our items, and then we could say, hey, for just each item, I'm going to display a list item. And that list item is going to be that given string. So what I'm going to do here is just going to display that list. I'm going to move that here. We're going to have that in our preview. So what I could say now is, yeah, I've got a column. I'm looping through the items that are passed in, and I'm just going to add a new list item. So, and there you go. Obviously, we need some spacing around those, and maybe we could add a new modifier here. We could say padding. As I mentioned, we can chain on multiple modifiers. So now we've got our column, we've looped through each item, and we've added a list item for each one. We're not too bothered about this extra padding here for now. That's not a concern. So obviously, there could be 50 items, it could be 100 items. So in this case, we want to be scrollable. So thankfully, Jetpack Compose has the concept of a scrollable column and a scrollable row. So all the items you pass there will be rendered into that scrollable column and displayed, and the user will be able to scroll them. There is something that the Compose team are working on, and it is available, but I think it's on I'm not sure if it's going to change. Essentially, it mimics the kind of behavior of a recycler view, where it only renders what is visible on screen, and as the user scrolls, they'll be lazily loaded. So what we can do here is use the lazy column for composable and pass in our items, and then for each item that is provided, a new instance of the composable within the body will be rendered. That's good. And we've got
Joe, sorry.
Yep.
Again, we have again the same problem.
I don't know what it is because my internet connection is quite. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. I can run through that again. So as I mentioned, we have our lazy column 4, which is used to lazy load items onto the inside a list, and the user will only see the items that are currently visible on screen. So essentially what a lazy column 4 will do, will take the composable body and will use the provided list to render a composable. So for each item in our list, we'll have a new list item rendered. And as the user scrolls, each one of them will be loaded. So we've now got our list, and that's great. But this isn't, if we copied this preview and added it as our content, this isn't going to look too great. It's just a list of items, and there's not much to it. So what I'm going to do here is, just before we wrap up, before the end of the session, I want to quickly take a look at some of the core parts of the material APIs in Compose, and these are going to be core to building, to rebuilding some of the. We have the concept of a scaffold, and if you're used to working, this is very similar to what.
Joe, sorry. We are still having the same problem. It just started, so try to see if you can solve the problem. Okay. Joe? No. Do you hear me?
Fine.
Okay, perfect. Kind of. We are sorry for this
That's all right.
problem right now.
I'm not sure if it's anything on my side. I haven't got anything running.
Okay, we can hear you well right now. Okay, so just for a second, sorry again, guys. We have a bad problem with a bad connection from Joe. He will reach us again in seconds. So we are going just to wait. For now, we will just remind you that we have, of course, the live session of Slido where you can ask questions. And as I saw, we have some questions right now, 7 until now. And for the other things, remind that we have some games from the offer D out 13 and 15. And yeah, that's it. We're going to wait a little bit for Joe, and we will be back. That's it. If you have any questions, try to ask it even for the DevFest. If you have any question of DevFest until Joe it comes out. In the meantime, we're going to do a little bit of presentation for Joe. Yeah, I think that a lot of people were trying to wait for this for questions about Android Compose and everything else. So we hope soon that he will come back. Just wait. Ovviamente stiamo cercando un attimo di capire il problema di Joe in questo momento, stiamo aspettando che torni online e niente, questo è quanto. Per ora in pratica le uniche cose che possiamo dirvi è che avete ovviamente fatto delle domande importanti che effettivamente aspettano una risposta da un GDE. E in questo momento l'unica cosa, guardatevi i vari giochi che ci sono in giro, guardatevi magari anche altri talk per la prossima sezione, cioè vedetevi. E niente, aspettiamo Joe e in caso arrivasse molto in ritardo partiremo direttamente col Q&A. Quindi stopperemo qua e al massimo registreremo una nuova volta la, la presentazione di Joe, così ce l'avete per intero. And here is again Joe. Okay, Joe, are you with us?
Hey, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
Been removed from the room. I was continuing.
Oh, don't worry. So just try to go on with your session, and if you want, just close the webcam so you don't have the delay from everything. And
where did you hear from? Where did it last stop?
Oh God, you're asking me a little bit more, a little bit too much. For now, just if you want to, we go directly to the Q&A then, and we will ask you to do a video of your presentation so we can put on YouTube in the next hours.
Cool.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Perfect
then.
Cool.
So I will share. So I will share then directly the screen from Slido.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. Just a sec.
I'll start my video because I'm not showing the screen anymore. So.
Okay. Perfect. Just a second, and here we are. Okay.
Cool.
Perfect. So first of all, we have the first question that is from an anonymous. Other than row column, it is possible to compose that layout via relative relationship between items. I mean, something similar to relative layout, etc.
Cool. Yeah. So in Compose, as far as I'm aware, there's not a direct equivalent of the relative layout, but there is the constraint layout, which I presume would be the way forward. I know in current Android development, like the recommendation is to use constraint over relative in not every case, but in a lot of cases. Yeah. So I would say in that case, the constraint layout inside of Compose would be the one to use. I didn't go into that because it's a bit more involved, but it's not too much to it. And I think it's still being worked on, but it is available in the current alpha if you want to have a play of it. And there's some good articles online about it.
Okay. Then we have, are there any drawbacks to using Compose in middle big mobile applications?
Not that I can think of. To be honest, I think it's going to be, I think eventually maybe try and push it as the way to build Android applications. Not any time in the next couple of years, but I think eventually it will be the standard. That's the way I see it. So I think Google will have in mind that it will be efficient to use in any kind of application. I know they're doing testing on build times and APK size to ensure that there's not any issues there. And so far, I haven't had any bad experiences there, so I don't think it will be a concern.
Okay, perfect. Then we have any tips on how to structure all the code when we have a big project?
It's a great one. I think if you're doing, it depends if you're doing like if you're already using a modularized approach to your app. So I think with Compose, I think one way to do it would be to make sure that you're splitting up composables, like I mentioned, into individual functions, like having them really focused rather than just having a massive composable that does a lot of things. Splitting those composable up into smaller functions and then having related composables in separate files will be a great way of splitting things up. So you could have a file for, I don't know, items or top app bars or something that's related to each other. I haven't got to that point of organization yet because I'm only using it in smaller side projects. But yeah, splitting things up well and small functions and into files, I think would be a way to help manage that. But because, no one's really using it in big applications yet, so I think there'll be a lot of learnings coming from the community and from a lot of people. One thing I would recommend is checking out the Google sample apps using Compose because they're organizing things well. The apps aren't huge, but they're doing it in a nice way. So I'd recommend checking out those.
Okay, perfect. Then we have from Lorenzo, great talk. From someone coming from native script, is it worth it, in your opinion, to learn Compose plus Kotlin? Do you think it is a future of mobile dev?
Could be a very opinionated answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I think personally in my eyes, like I'm really excited about Compose and also Kotlin multi-platform. I think like there's really something there. Obviously, multi-platform is, I think it's in either in alpha or beta. I can't remember what it's in, but I think that's gonna be really powerful, like in helping like create not cross platform, but apps that are showing a lot of logic. And the cool thing about Compose is like once you've comfortable with Compose and once you're like writing the UI with it, jumping across to something like Swift UI, like I've started doing Swift UI development in the last like 6 months, and jumping between Compose and Swift UIs, they're very similar. And I think being able to, not saying you have to go and be an iOS developer, but being able to do both is really good. I think from a professional point of view, like being able to have conversations with other developers, being able to sort of explore other code bases. And who knows, in future, maybe we'll have something that is, a bit more aligned when it comes to those UI. But yeah, I think Compose and Kotlin is a really good investment for mobile development.
Perfect. Then we have the last three questions. First is from Giovanni, that is asking, is Compose an attempt to improve the actual Android mobile development, or it will exist in parallel to native Java Kotlin, and both versus Flutter?
Yes. I think Compose is really going to change Android development personally. Like I think both in terms of productivity and just developer experience, I think it will make us developers a lot happier. We'll be able to build applications more stable applications, be able to test applications more easily, and so on. So I think it's going to be really, really help to improve mobile development. But saying that, like when you say in parallel with native JavaScript
Flutter.
Kotlin and
Yeah.
Flutter, I think like I don't know what the plan is for like the current way of building things in Android. My gut would be that eventually, like, it will be phased out in years to come. I think there'll always be a place for it. I don't know, but I think Google eventually will be Compose first, and they'll probably still support other things. But I think supporting both in the long term, I don't know how much sense that makes. But I don't really have any insights there. So again, that's completely opinionated. Versus Flutter, I think Flutter has its own space. If you want to create apps with Flutter, that's fine cross-platform. But I think there's always going to be a place for native applications, I believe.
Okay, perfect. Then we have Dennis that is asking 2 questions, or 3 in this kind of. So the first one is, what are the best practice when using Compose? Business logic is the same UI file?
Okay. Yeah, so I think we didn't dive too much into it because it's a bit more involved, but like with Compose, there's the concept of state. So the idea that the state is what will control how your items your composables are composed. So your business logic was essentially probably end up representing your state. So in my eyes, you'd have your, how we currently have the view model in Android, the architecture components view model. In my eyes, you would have that view model that would handle your communicate with your business logic, and that view model would return the state to your screen, and your composables would be rendered off that. Because then I think you have that your UI completely separate. And again, I don't know what the plan is with the Compose packages, but I think trying to keep that separated from your business logic as much as possible is going to be a good way of doing it, because then it makes it more easier to test. And then there's also other things like, I know JetBrains are currently hiring UI engineers for Compose, which is interesting because they're going to be doing their own things with Compose, maybe working on desktop stuff. So if you're going to be exploring that kind of side of things in future, like desktop and other areas, I think keeping your UI as separated as possible with Compose is going to be a smart move.
Okay, perfect. Then the second question from then is still, when Compose can be considered in production already, it's another way for building UI, or it will be the only way in the future?
I don't have any solid answers to that. I have guesses. Like I think production ready next year sometime. Like it won't be complete APIs. I don't think. I think what they have now, they're probably going to stabilize and listen to developer feedback and see what's missing. But my guess is summer next year. I don't know. That's a guess. Again, I don't know if that's right. I think it will be another way of building UI for now. And I think if you're starting Android or starting a new app, I think using Compose when it's production ready will be the advised way to do it. And my gut is that eventually in future it will be the way to build UI. So it's definitely worth investing time in and learning and using. But it's not a rush. It's not like the way we do things now. Google aren't going to stop supporting it. They're still going to add additions and they're still going to maintain it for many years along the line, I think.
Okay. Last one from Patrizia. Is it possible to test the UI with the UI test?
Yes. So there is a test dependency for Jetpack Compose, and it's really minimal and it's really really nice to use. Similar to Espresso, I think it even uses Espresso under the hood. So you can test composables individually. You can assert, you can perform clicks, verify text, and so on. There's quite a complete API, and they're still adding to it. So definitely worth recommending checking out the test package.
Perfect. Then, Joe, thank you again. We will ask you, of course, to send us the video of the talk, so we can share with all together. And thank you again, even for the QA and for your presence. And that's it.
Cool. Yeah, apologies again for the connection issues.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I'll sort out a video and send it over. But yeah, thanks for coming and enjoy the rest of the time.
Thank you.
Cool.
By the way,